is open to questions, and I'm sure we have microphones over both sides. So if you have a question, please go to either side and line up. I'm sure there should be some questions from the audience. Greg.
Not a question, just whoever has questions, get up and get in line, but identify yourself, please, for the purposes of our transcript. Your name and your affiliation.
My name is Keith Roper. I'm the current program lead for the Engineering Centers program at NSF, and I'm intrigued by the idea of setting up global partnerships. Clearly, this is something that the centers have been doing over the past 30 years in various ways, shapes, and forms. The challenge to those, as Owen tended to indicate, is that there are certain restrictions on intellectual property, on the support that's available in particular geographic institutions in terms of supporting researchers and how those funds can be used and who benefits from those. And I'm curious, maybe to hear from Owen and from Jean-Luc, how you balance the goal of having global by design, at the same time you respect the boundaries that are associated with finance and that are associated with intellectual property in different geographical areas.
I think the main point I would like to make in answer to your question, when I mean global by design, I really imply that what you want is to have a group of faculty of researchers who, from different parts of the world, want to pursue an idea and they strongly believe that as a group, they will be much more successful than independent players or even independent centers. Okay, and that's what I think we are promoting. Then all the issues that can come with it, it is for people like you and I to solve. Okay, and I'm not saying that they are not easy, but honestly, I have found that when there is a strong commitment from the different partners to actually develop a program, things that intellectual property issues, I think, can be resolved. Sometimes not perfectly. I would say that it is, easier to work with Europe in general than it is with the US in many ways. But I don't view those things as being roadblocks. Okay, I think and there are great examples of global programs that have been developed with different partners from different parts of the world. So I tend to be, maybe I've been too long as an administrator, I tend to not to worry about the administration, I worry about the content first and then worry about solving those issues.
So I think one of the advantages of the increased attention to grand challenges and people configuring programs that way is, I think there will be ever more openness to global collaboration for these big, complex global challenges. They may be of a scale and complexity that no individual country can take them on by themselves. There will be complementary expertise and capabilities in these other countries, which people will want to reach out to. There will be a greater scope for a win-win in taking on some of these challenges. Similarly, I think the way funding is being structured around some of these thematic areas will make it, I would like to think, easier to align funding mechanisms in two countries. It's always been a very practical challenge to how to run two competitions in parallel and for both sides to run their peer review processes in parallel. There's something about the common global good of some of these kinds of thematic areas which should lend themselves to people being more open to aligning these things. It's probably also worth saying that certainly, and maybe this is for a session later in the day, but our experience of talking to large R&D intensive corporations about their major university industry partnerships is an increased interest in joining their investments in different universities and different centers around the world together and make sure they're better connected. So I think there'll also be a more supportive environment from partner firms associated with these corporations as well, which I think is interesting.
Arun Somani from Iowa State. My question was similar to the global by design. We just take focus on the by design part of it. And we can do several things by design. Global is one aspect of it, but there could be several other aspects of it even. And the question I have is that what can the funding agencies do to create that by design, achieving certain goals? What are those they can play? What are the effective mechanisms which could be useful for the community? People think of ideas. Several ideas are presented to community, to funding agencies. Some get selected and they get promoted further, and the others get dropped, lack of better word. Question is, how do we harness on that and bring them to the life? And what can be mechanisms for that purpose? So some thoughts on that would be very much appreciated.
I think it's a good question, and maybe it is in fact a good question for the committee rather than for the panel. There's all kinds of ideas that you could my experience has been that faculty and sometimes their students can be ahead of us. They can start developing those ideas and those relationships by themselves, and there could be some NSF has done very well in many times by providing small amounts of money on a relatively flexible basis and opportunistic basis to explore a bit more something that is already happening somewhere. And I think that maybe some seed programs could be created. I'm thinking aloud here. I don't have any great idea, but I remember I was myself in doing work for many years in the earthquake engineering seismic field. And every time there was a big earthquakes in the world, NSF found ways to give a few dollars here and there to initiate some activities and programs, including in my case at some stage became a small center. And this was very effective, done very quickly and building upon things that seem to have potential in terms of just ideas.
So from a perspective of managing large teams of people over the last couple of decades, I'd say by design usually comes down to incentives and measurements. So incentives are not necessarily always money. Incentives can be rewards, can be what you hold up for publicity, etc., or future funding. And measurements is what is it that the agencies ask for. I heard somebody complain about large reports are desired. Well, I imagine that those large reports are some of the measurements people want, and always those will be 1% of the volume is probably the real ones, and 99% is kind of boilerplate. And if those get highlighted, those probably achieve the effect. And this is kind of the human aspect of managing things. I mean, by design, it's not something, I think, which is abstract. It comes down to those few things.
So we have 3 more questioners and 4 more minutes. So let's keep the questions short and the answers brief as well.
My name is Kelly Sullivan. I'm with Pacific Northwest National Laboratory. And Arvind, your answer actually leads into this question, which is dealing with the incentives and the mission space of the various partners in these centers. You have very different reward structures. You have very different missions that the organizations have. In your experiences, what are the best ways to deal with those?
So you mix up academia, industry, and government funding, and there are different missions. But I think it can be brought together when you say you acknowledge those different missions up front, and you actually point to the benefits for each one. And you got to have a little bit of flexibility that on all these things, there has to be a primary motivation. Somebody talked about it can't be completely mission oriented. I think that was Dr. Shamu. You got to have there is some inherent curiosity and a desire to achieve an outcome. Outcome has to be, to me, tangible and numerical. I mean, I'm an engineer, I'll admit, through and through. So once you achieve this tangible and numerical, now it translates differently for those 3. For the academic, it is no doubt about moving the needle on science and knowledge. For the corporation, it is about typically harnessing that to maybe make some money in the future. It can't be definite. And for government, it has to be about enabling both those items, including talent.
Andreas Kingelaris, University of Illinois. One of the challenges that is faced by all universities today is how easy it is for industry to go after the university talent, especially in areas that are hot and up and coming. And I think one of the topics that always comes up is how can industry and universities share that talent in a way that is both creative and sustainable at the same time? So Arvin, I would like to start with you, giving an answer to this question.
I'll begin with my humorous ones. He talks about industry stealing his talent, but I'll point out that Andreas has taken 4 people from me in the last 2 years. So it is bi-directional, it is not uni. I think it's about creating a shared and bi-directional system. I think always, I mean, in industry, if I have a critical need, I can no doubt probably attract somebody with short-term compensation that may be attractive to some people. On the other hand, I cannot give them the same freedom that academia can. Let's be blunt about it. I just cannot. Now, how do you make it bidirectional? I mean, I fundamentally believe that we can get new ideas from both students and faculty. And by the way, if our people want that freedom, then we should encourage them to go back to academia. And we do that too. I would love to pursue more joint pursuits with universities, and we have been pretty clear about that. We have much more intense focus on doing that now than we probably ever did in the past. And all those issues you brought up on IP, et cetera, have to be solved. By the way, I'll point out, I think all those issues are easy to solve, both globally. I mean, we operate in 195 countries, so we do have a little experience in that. Data issues are not easy to solve. The national rules and regulations on data are the ones that come into place. But to go back to Andreas, I think that defining programs and allowing people to freely move back and forth, albeit for limited amounts of time, is the way to go resolve that.
Something very practical and that not directly related to that. You know, in the US, my experience has been, likely still the case, it is still hard to get researchers from industry and academics to work together in the same facility, in the same lab, the same space, using the same equipment, because of incredibly complex overhead calculation issues and finding how much time they spend in a bathroom and all those things. You know, I can tell you, currently where I am now, we have colleagues from Dow Chemical here. The Dow Chemical people, we have a bunch of them working with us. I don't know how much time they spend with our analytical equipment in chemistry, how much time they're on the space, and it makes an environment where people go back and forth. I think it is very, very powerful. I think we waste a little bit of time in counting bins in the current system. So that's a practical recommendation on your committee.
So I apologize to the last questioner, but we're out of time. I'd like to particularly thank Jean-Loup and Owen for making the international trip, but also to all 3 of our panelists for a really terrific session. So let's give them a warm welcome.